Today's Tuesday, March 14th, 2023, back for another daily review. And tonight I'm going to go over some trades I took on NASDAQ. One was a loss, which I will go over, and the other was a win. Same type of idea, but on each trade, but one I was a little early on. So I'll break all that down in just a minute. But first, I want to start with the dollar index because in the last weekend review I was talking about how I was going to be expecting a period of consolidation for the dollar. And it was really defined by these points here. So we have this sell side liquidity target that got hit a few weeks ago. And we saw on that move on the weekly chart, this fair value gap that got created to the downside, but then got disrespected on the way up. So the lean for me is still bullish dollar, but because we had essentially wicked and rated this swing high, we were open to the idea of seeing a retracement back down and just sort of forming this range where price might now reach down towards this wick and the imbalance that resides below it. So we're seeing that play out. The support after this buy side got taken, we saw a displacement back down below the support level. And so now the bias short term, for me at least, is to expect lower prices on the dollar. But again, overall bullish in the bigger grand scheme of things. But I don't really know if dollar is really going to be helping me out that much in the short term. It's really just watching how it ping pongs between these points and then waiting to see which direction does it ultimately want to break. Where do we see displacement outside of this range? And I'd love to see this break above these highs right here, but that could take some time after it works its way down. So these are the levels I'm going to look out for, but let's take a look at what happened on NASDAQ today and the situation we're in. Also, I'll take a look at S&P because I am seeing a little bit of a dislocation between these two. What I mean by that is that I think I'm getting a mixed signal on what direction I want to be going in, because NASDAQ is definitely looking stronger. Like I could actually see how we've kind of taken out this high. We've slowly had this channel retracement down into this imbalance and this weekly level, this previous week's open. And we had a near perfect rejection from it. More or less. I mean, it's not the exact level. Actually, I thought it was maybe on the March contract. This is not the June contract, but on the March contract, I think it might show a very perfect rejection. Either way, we do have this old volume imbalance here as well. So we have this weekly area of interest that price seems to be pushing up aggressively. Not only that, we have on the monthly chart, which I talked about in the last video, I was going to keep an eye on the monthly on last month's low. And this was more so true and this is what I mean, on S&P, let's look at last month's low. We've yet to really trade above it. We did hit this one low here. So I was holding the view that we could likely see these three lows get tapped at some point this week. And we got one of them. And after hitting that one, we've kind of turned back up, but we have not aggressively reclaimed this previous month's low on the lower time frames. We haven't reclaimed it on the daily or the 4 hour. In fact, we're still kind of seeing that this is a resistance that hasn't even really been tested since it's been broken beneath. So in this sense, it feels like we are likely to see a pullback up into here, but my first instinct would be to expect that we see some sort of a sell-off from this area. And if you look at the daily chart, we formed a swing low after hitting that monthly level. Swing low, these daily candles on either side are higher than this one. So we formed a swing low. And when we see that, my first thought is that we're likely to see some sort of a pullback. That pullback can be just to premium level, like this imbalance right here, or this order block. I actually like this order block better. It's around the same level anyway, but I like it because it's this big beefy candle that punched up above all these highs here. And for a period of time, this looked pretty bullish. A lot of people were probably buying pullbacks here, and then it looked like it was holding as support for a day and then aggressively traded lower beneath it. So I would not be surprised to see a reaction anywhere around here. So we'll have to see how it lines up with time of day and what type of lower time frame setup we have around it. We also have this old fair value gap that aligns with it quite nicely. Just drag it across. You can see that we've come down into it. We held it as support for a minute, came back up, filled in this gap, aggressive move back down, tried to hold it one more time, impulse below. And so again, I will look for a possible short setup in this area unless we see some very aggressive displacement gapping up through it. So I'm not going to just short a first touch of anything here, but if we see bullish displacement through it, I'm gonna just wait and watch and see what comes next. Because if I look and compare it to NASDAQ, we've essentially rated the previous month's low and aggressively reclaimed it. So that's the kind of thing I was looking for on S&P, and I'm seeing it on NASDAQ. So it's hard to know, for me at least right now, which is the one that's kind of lagging behind, or which is the one, is S&P lagging behind, and is it going to catch up and kind of join the bullishness of NASDAQ? Is NASDAQ going to continue higher above these highs? Or is this just NASDAQ being kind of overzealous, overrunning a resistance area and looking bullish for a second? Kind of like how it did last week when it went above this candle here, this area of interest I had. It kind of overran the level, overshot it, and then kind of snapped back lower, whereas S&P respected the same kind of price action, the same kind of candle here, respected it perfectly. So I'm wondering is which one's really the better signal to go off of. So still haven't quite decided that yet. So anyway, what was the trade? So the first trade was, we have two levels here. So we have this breaker, but it's kind of a very tight range, which is not ideal. But then we also had this inversion level. So we have this bullish fair value gap that pushed out of this range that offered no support on the way down. And you can see this is where I got in essentially on the second entry. So I didn't really know which one was going to provide the opportunity. The warning sign I had, it wasn't really I kind of, I should say, I stretched the rules a little bit. And that's a sign that maybe it's not that it's not going to work, or it's not really one to take, because this happened at right before 8 o'clock my time. So right before 11. And I was hoping that this would set up around 10:30, because at first it was hitting this breaker level shortly after 10:30. And so we know 10:30 can be a turning point. It's when the opening range is formed. And so I thought, okay, it would have been ideal for it to sell off and show us a displacement kind of around here shortly after, give it a little wiggle room 10-15 minutes after 10:30 to where it can show its hand at the downside. It never did that. It just stayed kind of consolidated. Another 30 minutes to an hour, another 30 minutes, it stayed consolidated. And then right before 11, we get the displacement. So I happened to be here watching it, and I took the trade. My stop was at the high at first. So long story short, we got an initial drop. Could have taken profits here, partial. I did not. What I did do, though, is I did reduce the risk to above this candle here. And so I ended up getting stopped out at a reduced risk loss. So very happy with that. That to me is a success, because I was able to reduce my risk after it moved away. I guess you could say maybe I wasn't following my plan perfectly because of how it was a little bit later than what I would normally want to enter this type of setup. But nonetheless, in terms of executing the trade on just reading the price action, I don't feel like I suffocated the trade. In my view, it could still come up and wick into this fair value gap one more time and then sell off. So I was giving myself an opportunity for that to play out. So I wasn't I wasn't suffocating the trade. I was giving myself a chance. It really felt like there's no reason for price to come back above this candle, these kind of big displacement candles. And you can make an argument that I should have put it over this high. But like I said, it's not unheard of for price to kind of come back and take out a short-term high into an imbalance and then sell off. So I was leaving the door open to that. Now, in hindsight, it was really just a pullback into an imbalance if you just kind of zoom out on the 5-minute, and I think possibly the 15-minute as well. So on multiple time frames, 5 and 15-minute, just a notch up above the M1, you can see that there's actually multiple reasons to kind of go long here in this general area. So, in hindsight, not the best trade, but I was still watching things play out afterwards because it did feel like this was a very strong level or a strong area of interest. I'm sorry, to see some sort of reaction. And so I kept this on, and sure enough, we actually got, and this is just to contrast to see how I was, in my view, forcing this, not forcing it, but just kind of fudging the times a little bit. I was kind of, it's kind of the setup, but it is a little bit after when I would normally like to take it. That's a sign to listen to that I didn't really listen to today, as opposed to this, which is actually very much textbook ICT, the way he teaches it, which is a raid after 1:30 New York. So you can see we have this move up into kind of the midway point of that old fair value gap. And then we consolidated a bit over lunch. So between 12 and 1, we're seeing this kind of just consolidation above this high, more or less. And then after 1, we get this big displacement down, and we can see a couple things of interest. Number 1, we have this breaker. So I would mark this out as a breaker. We also have this gap that we want to see this stay unfilled as a breakaway gap. So we have this consolidation. And when you see a displacement away, you kind of want to see these the first gap closest to the consolidation stay unfilled. But I don't feel comfortable doing that unless there's other levels that price is broken beneath. So in this case, we have this breaker aligned with this fair value gap. And we also have, which I also liked, was this bullish fair value gap as well. So when price is all the way down here and I'm looking for where do I want to sell from, where do I want to put my stop, etc., I'm saying, I'm looking at this. I'm looking at, basically we have 3 different levels of resistance in the way. So we have, and they all align. So we have this bullish fair value gap that got disrespected on the move down. We have this breaker, both of which kind of align with this fair value gap. And above that, we also have these old lows and this gap here. So there's really multiple levels. If price were to come all the way up here, I'm probably wrong and I'm probably not interested in being in the trade. Furthermore, time of day. Price comes up, wicks into the level. I didn't get in here. I actually would have taken this entry right here, but price was already down here, and I put my limit right at this inversion level right there. So this lowest one, and I think it was a 25 point. Yeah, so 25 points gave me a little cover if price wanted to wick up above this candle into this imbalance, but I didn't feel the need to put it all the way up here because, as I said, I just didn't see any deal of likelihood of coming all the way up above these resistance levels. And if it did, then I probably didn't want to be in the trade anyway. And so my target was initially way lower, but I closed it out after 2R. So just to fast forward what happened, when it was all the way down here and then came all the way back up and started to push up, I think it was more or less 2R. This is when I closed out of the trade just because I took the loss earlier, and I'm very happy with just taking 2Rs. I know it's not fancy, but if I'm taking 2Rs, frequently, I'm doing very well. But again, notice that we got that raid. So really the best kind of textbook entry would have been after we take this buy side liquidity after 1:30. So we take it, honestly, this would have been the kind of on the close of this candle. So notice how it's respecting. So we have the raid at the time of day where we expect one, and then a very nice close reacting again. Look how the bodies are respecting that old discount 5-minute fair value gap here. And then so this would have been, in hindsight, a great entry. And then you could have just taken this and it would have been over almost 3.5 R to just this level, and you could have been even better off. So that's what happened today. And now we're continuing to push up after hours. And so I'm going to be curious to see, does this continue to push higher off of this daily level? I do like these targets here. We could come back into the volume imbalance one more time. So this is very much on the table. So if we are going to be bullish, I'm going to look and see where could we see a low of the day tomorrow. And I will use that with a view of the sessions. We can see we have this hourly imbalance right here. So we'll have to see what we get around New York open, but we have our Asia range right now. And so we very well could see kind of like a consolidation. Maybe London kind of does a false start where it kind of breaks it and then comes back all the way back down. And we see a setup here for New York to take us higher. So something like that could very well happen. And if we get a very clean opportunity, I would be more than happy to get involved. However, I'm going to keep a close eye on S&P as well, because it's not as bullish to me as NASDAQ. And these are levels where we could see a rejection from. So that's going to be it for me for tonight. And hope you all have a great rest of the week.